Every single day I wake up and I think of a reason not to do it every single day.
Bill Brands, what do they call you?
I'm Brett Maverick, ma'am, and I'm pleased to meet you.
Mel Gibson was once one of the most dominant figures in Hollywood. Not just successful, not just famous, but untouchable. He carried blockbuster franchises, opened serious dramas, and later directed films that reshaped how epic violence and faith were portrayed on screen. Yet today, when conversations turn to great modern filmmakers or defining movie stars of the last 40 years, his name often appears as an afterthought. That absence is not accidental. It raises a larger question about how Hollywood remembers talent, forgives behavior, and chooses which legacies to protect. Gibson's rise was unusually direct. Born in the United States and raised largely in Australia, he entered acting with a raw intensity that immediately separated him from his contemporaries. Early performances revealed a presence that didn't rely on polish. He carried tension naturally. Even when silent, his characters felt dangerous or wounded, sometimes both. This quality made him ideal for the role that changed everything. Mad Max. The film itself was low budget, but its impact was enormous. Gibson didn't simply play an action hero. He embodied a breakdown of civilization. The physical control, emotional restraint, and sudden explosions of violence made the character iconic almost overnight. What followed confirmed this wasn't a fluke. Mad Max 2 expanded his international profile. Gallipoli proved he could handle dramatic weight. And within a few years, Gibson established himself as a rare combination. A serious actor with mass appeal. By the time he entered the 1,980 seconds fully, Hollywood saw him as bankable and adaptable. He wasn't boxed into one genre. He could sell tragedy, romance, aggression, and humor with equal effectiveness. That balance reached its most commercially refined form with the Lethal Weapon series. As Martin Riggs, Gibson created one of the defining action characters of the era. The role required tonal precision. Riggs was funny, reckless, suicidal, unstable, and deeply traumatized. Gibson leaned into every contradiction. He was capable of broad comedy one moment and unnerving emotional darkness the next. The performance elevated the franchise beyond standard action fare and showed Hollywood executives that Gibson could carry long-running commercial properties without becoming static. During this period, his dominance was unquestioned. Studios trusted him. Directors wanted him. He could headline serious dramas like The Year of Living Dangerously and Tequila Sunrise without undercutting his action credibility. This versatility mattered because it laid the groundwork for what would come later. Gibson wasn't only learning how audiences reacted to him, he was learning pacing, tone, and emotional rhythm. He was observing structure, not just performing within it. That observation paid off in a way few expected when he stepped behind the camera. Braveheart was the turning point. At the time, Gibson directing a large-scale medieval epic seemed like a gamble. The film demanded logistical control, visual coherence, and emotional clarity on a scale far beyond anything he had been associated with previously as an actor. The result changed his career permanently. Braveheart wasn't just successful. It became culturally embedded. Its battle sequences redefined historical action filmmaking. Its emotional throughline turned a political rebellion into a personal tragedy. Most importantly, it proved that Gibson understood cinema holistically. He wasn't improvising. He was composing. The industry responded accordingly. Awards followed. Respect followed. Gibson was no longer simply a movie star with unusual intensity. He was now viewed as a filmmaker with a distinct sensibility. That sensibility leaned heavily toward physical experience. Pain was not abstract in his films. It was lingering, exhausting, and often spiritual. Victory felt costly. Survival felt earned. These instincts would become central to everything he directed afterward. That creative confidence only grew stronger. The Passion of the Christ represented an unprecedented rejection of Hollywood convention, an independently financed film, shot almost entirely in ancient languages, depicting religious brutality without dilution, should not have succeeded by traditional standards. Yet it did. Spectacularly. Whether one agreed with its intent or execution, the craftsmanship was undeniable. Gibson controlled tone, cohesion, and performance in a way few directors would attempt. The film's financial success confirmed that vision, if precise enough, did not need institutional approval. Apocalypto followed the same philosophy. Unknown actors, indigenous languages, minimal exposition, relentless narrative momentum. Gibson trusted visual storytelling over dialogue and atmosphere over explanation. Critics noted its technical mastery even as debates over interpretation continued. By this point, his identity as a filmmaker was clear. He was not interested in comfort. He was interested in immersion. He made films that demanded endurance from the viewer, not reassurance. At the peak of his creative authority, Gibson stood in a position most in Hollywood never reach. He had proven himself as a leading man, franchise star, award-winning director, and box office draw operating outside the traditional studio system. His influence was structural, not cosmetic, and that makes what followed impossible to ignore. Because almost immediately after reaching this level of power, everything began to collapse. The collapse did not happen quietly. It happened publicly, messily, and in a way Hollywood does not forgive easily. Years of personal instability, fueled by alcoholism and unresolved anger, surfaced in a series of incidents that shifted the narrative around Mel Gibson almost overnight. Headlines replaced analysis of his films. Private failures became public record. Offensive remarks, recorded conversations, and arrests reframed him not as a volatile artist, but as a liability. In an industry built on image as much as ability, that distinction mattered. Hollywood's response was decisive. Offers slowed, then stopped. Relationships cooled. Studios that once trusted him with massive budgets no longer wanted his name above the title. It is important to separate the facts here. The backlash was not arbitrary. The behavior was real, and the damage was self-inflicted. Gibson did not lose his standing because of artistic decline. He lost it because he became someone Hollywood no longer wanted to defend, explain, or associate with publicly. What followed was not complete disappearance, but effective exile. He continued working, but mostly outside the spotlight he once dominated. Acting roles became smaller. Projects carried far less visibility. For the first time since the beginning of his career, Gibson was no longer shaping conversations about cinema. He was reacting to a system that had moved on without him. This period exposed a truth many stars never face. Talent alone does not guarantee permanence. Hollywood is willing to forget even its most proven contributors once they stop fitting the narrative it wishes to sell. During these years, the industry itself was changing. Franchises replaced auteurs. Risk avoidance became standard. Studios favored predictability over vision. Global branding over singular perspective. Gibson's filmmaking style, which relied on intensity, control, and moral seriousness, did not align with this shift. Even without his controversies, his approach would have struggled to find institutional support in an era dominated by intellectual property and safe replication. His exile, therefore, was not only moral but structural. Yet exile did not mean loss of ability. When Gibson eventually returned to directing with Hacksaw Ridge, the result was revealing. The film was restrained compared to his earlier work, but it carried the same underlying discipline. Action sequences were brutal without glorification. Violence was horrifying rather than triumphant. Character psychology guided structure, not spectacle. Critics took notice. Award nominations followed. The conversation quietly changed from whether Gibson should be allowed back to whether his skill had ever left. Hacksaw Ridge proved something significant. Gibson's creative instincts had sharpened with time, not dulled. He no longer needed overwhelming scale to assert control. His confidence was evident in pacing, in performance direction, and his refusal to simplify suffering for audience comfort. Many directors never recover from long stretches away from the chair. Gibson returned with precision intact. That alone forced a reassessment among those willing to look past reputation. Still, the return was incomplete. Despite critical success, Gibson did not regain the position he once held. He was not welcomed back as a defining voice of his generation. Instead, he was treated as an exception, a cautionary case. A director allowed to work but not celebrated. The industry acknowledged the quality of his craft without embracing the totality of his legacy. This selective acceptance revealed how Hollywood manages discomfort. It permits contribution but avoids canonization. Part of this reluctance stems from Gibson's specific kind of genius. His work is confronting rather than reassuring. His camera does not flinch. He focuses on endurance, belief, consequence, and pain. These themes are less compatible with an industry increasingly oriented toward escapism and brand consistency. His films demand moral engagement, not passive consumption. For Hollywood, that makes him difficult even without controversy. There is also the issue of control. Gibson has historically sought creative authority. He reshapes characters, challenges scripts, resists dilution. This independence once made him valuable. In a risk-averse environment, it makes him inconvenient. His refusal to soften edges or embrace uniformity places him outside the prevailing system by design as much as by circumstance. As a result, Gibson exists today in an ambiguous space. He is neither erased nor restored. His films are studied, referenced, and quietly admired, but rarely integrated into present-day narratives about cinematic innovation. Younger generations may recognize individual titles without understanding the continuity of his influence. This is how forgetting often occurs. Not through denial of achievement, but through silence. The irony is that filmmakers continue to borrow from his techniques. The visceral realism of modern war cinema. The emphasis on physical suffering rather than spectacle. The integration of faith or conviction without irony. These elements did not originate with Gibson, but he amplified them with unusual consistency at the highest commercial level. His absence from contemporary praise does not erase his fingerprints from the medium. Hollywood did not forget Mel Gibson's genius because it disappeared. It forgot because remembering forces confrontation with questions the industry prefers to avoid. About forgiveness, about separating art from the artist, about how much discomfort audiences are truly willing to engage with. Gibson's career embodies those tensions fully, without resolution. And that may be why his name remains complicated, even as his work remains undeniable. To understand whether Hollywood truly forgot Mel Gibson's genius, it is necessary to separate influence from approval. Hollywood does not erase talent outright. It minimizes, redirects, and eventually reframes it. Gibson's case fits this pattern precisely. His contributions were substantial, but his presence became inconvenient. The industry chose distance over engagement, not because his work lacked value, but because its implications were uncomfortable. Measured purely by craft, Gibson's career holds up against almost any modern filmmaker who transitioned from actor to director. As an actor, his effectiveness was rooted in restraint. He rarely overplayed emotion. His characters communicated through posture, pacing, and silence as much as dialogue. This physical intelligence translated directly into his directing. He understood how bodies move through space, how exhaustion registers on screen, and how violence alters psychology. These are not abstract concepts. They require experiential understanding, and Gibson possessed it intuitively. As a director, his strengths were consistency and control. He staged action with spatial clarity, not confusion. He allowed scenes to breathe when emotional weight demanded it, and tightened them when urgency was required. His editing favored consequence over speed. These traits are often discussed abstractly in film criticism, but Gibson applied them systematically across genres. Whether historical epic, religious drama, or war film, his focus remained on endurance and faith under pressure. That thematic cohesion is a hallmark of serious authorship. Yet authorship alone does not guarantee acceptance. Hollywood rewards innovation selectively. When innovation aligns with profitability and public comfort, it is celebrated. When it provokes moral or social tension, it is tolerated quietly or discouraged. Gibson's films consistently provoked strong reactions. Even when financially successful, they invited controversy by their nature. That positioned him as a figure who demanded engagement rather than offering escapism. For an industry increasingly driven by risk mitigation, that demand became a liability. There is also the question of accountability. Gibson's personal actions cannot be dismissed, and they fundamentally altered how his presence was perceived. Hollywood has historically forgiven many figures, but forgiveness often follows strategic value. When someone becomes more disruptive than useful, moral judgment hardens quickly. In Gibson's case, the line between condemnation and convenience blurred. His exile was framed as ethical necessity, but it also coincided with an era when his style no longer fit commercial priorities. The result is a legacy that exists without institutional sponsorship. Gibson's films are not routinely included in celebratory retrospectives. His name is not promoted alongside peers with comparable achievements. Film schools discuss Braveheart, The Passion of the Christ, Apocalypto, and Hacksaw Ridge as texts, not as milestones tied to a living creative force. This distance allows Hollywood to benefit from his work without confronting the contradictions it represents. That contradiction is central. Mel Gibson represents a form of filmmaking rooted in seriousness of intent. He does not approach violence lightly. He does not treat suffering as aesthetic decoration. His work insists that physical and moral actions carry lasting cost. In a cultural climate increasingly defined by irony, detachment, and perpetual franchising, this approach feels almost archaic. Yet it continues to resonate precisely because it resists dilution. The idea that Hollywood forgot Gibson is therefore incomplete. He is remembered selectively. His successes are isolated from his identity. His influence is absorbed without attribution. His failures are foregrounded without equal examination of resilience or recovery. This selective memory shapes public perception subtly but effectively. Over time, it does not erase genius. It neutralizes it. What remains undeniable is that Gibson did the work. He proved himself at every level available to him. He succeeded within the system, outside it, and in defiance of its expectations. Few artists can claim that range. Fewer still survive personal collapse with their technical ability intact. Hacksaw Ridge did not represent a comeback narrative as much as confirmation. His skill never vanished. It was merely sidelined. If Hollywood has learned anything from Gibson's career, it is likely not the lesson audiences expect. The system did not absorb his intensity. It avoided it. It moved towards safer voices and more predictable returns. That evolution explains as much about Hollywood's current state as it does about Gibson's position within it. In the end, Mel Gibson's genius persists independent of approval. His films endure because they are constructed with conviction, discipline, and seriousness rarely sustained across decades. Hollywood may no longer center him, celebrate him, or champion him, but forgetting implies absence. His work remains visible, studied, and influential, even when his name is spoken cautiously or not at all. That is the quiet reality of his legacy. Not erased, not redeemed, not fully forgiven, simply left standing apart from a system that no longer knows what to do with someone who made great work, paid heavily for personal failures, and still refuses to soften what he puts on screen.